Viewers, November will conclude in a few days from now, and Union Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal had spoken of a November deadline to finalize the India-U.S. trade deal. But how far have we progressed in this proposed trade deal, and are we any closer than we were before? We decode this with U.S. Congressman Ami Bera. But first up, let's tell you where things stand at the moment. Now, in February this year, we had seen Modi and Trump set up a U.S. $500 billion bilateral trade target, and both leaders announced plans to negotiate a bilateral trade agreement in 2025. In July 30th, we had seen Trump announce 25% tariff on Indian export goods. On the 6th of August, Trump doubled the tariff to Indian export goods to 50%. 17th of October saw Indian trade negotiation team visiting Washington. We've seen, of course, several rounds of negotiations in New Delhi and Washington take place. And on the 18th of November, India says will only accept a deal that's fair and equitable. We also saw statements coming in from Piyush Goyal and President Trump. Let's listen into those comments.
I said whenever the deal is fair, equitable and balanced, you will hear the goods. I said whenever the deal is fair, equitable and balanced, you will hear the goods.
You're watching the News Hour at 10, debate number 2 on Times Now, Super Prime Time.
Joining us now is a very special guest. We have with us Congressman Ami Bera, who's of course a Democrat. Thank you so much for speaking to Times Now, Congressman Bera. You, along with Republican lawmaker Joe Wilson, have introduced a bipartisan resolution in the U.S. Congress recognizing the strategic value of the historic partnership between New Delhi and Washington. You've also said that your resolution aims to show the support for the India-U.S. partnership and that it has been the same for the past 3 decades across various regimes that we've seen. And you also said that this is a tool to activate the Indian-American diaspora. This is coming, of course, amidst the strained ties between India and U.S., where hefty tariffs have been imposed and a lot of turbulence on various issues. How much of this is symbolic reassurance and how much is actionable policy?
I think it's actionable policy. I led a congressional delegation to India in September, and I really did see some of the turbulence in the relationship between the United States and India, largely because of some of the words of President Trump and some of the policies that were coming out of the Trump administration. I thought it was very important for members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, to say nothing has changed from our perspective. Going back to Bill Clinton, George Bush, President Obama, President Trump, President Biden, it's been our strategy to increase our economic ties, increase our security ties between the United States and India, and nothing's changed. When I talk to the businesses in India, they understand the importance of that economic relationship. And also when I visited Western Naval Command in Mumbai, they understand the partnership on the geopolitical strategic security front.
Right. Recently we've seen how India has signed a landmark deal as far as, importing 2.2 million tons of U.S. LPG. That's nearly 10% of India's annual LPG imports. Now, this has come shortly after New Delhi is actively trying to shrink its trade surplus with the U.S. following President Trump's imposition of the 50% tariffs on Indian goods. Do you see India's increased purchases of U.S. energy, crude, LNG, so on and so forth, as well as LPG, as a pathway to resolving these trade tensions? And you believe Washington should now respond by rolling back the tariff barriers?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm hoping that we can get a trade deal with India done. It seems like it's fairly close. And if there's anything Congress can do to get this across the finish line, certainly I think that energy purchases are good both for the United States, but also good for India because, as it booms, its energy needs also are increasing. I think there's also other areas that we should be working closely together on: technology, artificial intelligence. Those are natural alignments. India's water needs. So, can we help India with desalination to meet its water needs? So, I mean, the alignments are all there. Let's forge these strategic partnerships so there's predictability. And again, I think that was part of the reason for doing the resolution.
Right. What about the U.S. Congress itself? How does that view the energy cooperation as part of the broader Indo-Pacific strategy?
I think the Congress sees the energy cooperation as a real positive. Certainly there are some members of Congress that have concern about India's purchasing of energy from Russia and what that looks like. This allows India to move off of the Russian oil purchasing. That said, again, I think we recognize in Congress India's energy needs are growing as its economies are growing. So, what does that look like? This is a moment where India can flex its diplomatic muscle. I do think President Trump very much wants to find a resolution to the conflict in Ukraine. India has ties to Russia, has lines of communication, and certainly I'd love to see seasoned diplomats like Jay Shankar and others really help find an end to this conflict.
Right. In your earlier comments, you've said that certain individuals like Peter Navarro are not friends of the US-India relationship. Why then do you think that Trump has kept them in his inner circle? And also, do you believe that the Trump administration's mixed messaging, some positive statements coming in from the president, but also harsh language that has been used in the past by advisors, has created a lot of strategic confusion?
I agree. It has created strategic confusion. Again, I think that's why members of Congress have to speak out, Democrats and Republicans, because, again, nothing's changed from our perspective. We are talking to the Senate as well to have the senators introduce a companion resolution as well. I think the president's getting some bad advice. By all accounts, his relationship with Prime Minister Modi is a strong one. I think there are folks inside the administration, like this $100,000 H1-B visa fee seems to be a rapidly hatched scheme that doesn't make sense. And then, last week you heard the president on Fox News saying, well, we need this high-skilled labor coming to the United States. We need these individuals coming. So that doesn't totally make sense. I do think it is folks like Peter Navarro and others that are pushing this agenda. And I would hope the president works with us in Congress and works through these policies.
Right. And now President Trump has repeatedly claimed that he personally stopped the war during the India's Operation Sindoor between the 7th of May and the 10th of May. Now, this has been clarified repeatedly, including by the Prime Minister, the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jay Shankar as well, including the Prime Minister, in fact, making a statement in the Indian Parliament. How do you see this claim by Donald Trump? Because his repeated reassertion of these claims leads to inevitable controversies back home here domestically in India.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump makes a lot of claims at times here in the United States as well that are not actually factually correct. The United States certainly played a supportive role in supporting India in the dialogue and trying to help find a ceasefire. But at the end of the day, this was between India and Pakistan, and any longer-term peace will be negotiated between India and Pakistan. Again, I hope the United States is able to play a supportive role, and there's a path forward, but it's up to India and Pakistan to find that path forward.
Right. And as you've mentioned, you've said that Trump is getting bad advice because when he mentions India and Pakistan in the same breath, that really leads to a lot of confusion. There's a lot of dehyphenation that's happened over a long period of time that he's rehyphenating. What concrete steps can the Congress then take to ensure that U.S. policy consistently reflects the reality that you've described, that there's no equivalence between India and Pakistan?
I mean, that's another reason why we're doing the resolution. We have spent 3 decades dehyphenating the two countries. You're not seeing American companies make multi-billion-dollar investments in Pakistan. You're not seeing us do joint military exercises with Pakistan. That's all happening with India, and that's not going to change. India is a country on the rise with a growing economy. Pakistan has its own challenges, the largest number of domestic terror attacks. Obviously, we've seen the cross-border attacks into India, and now you see the tensions between Pakistan and Afghanistan. We want to create a stable Pakistan, but again, our long-term interest as the United States is this 21st century partnership with India.
Right. I'm also asking you this because we know that Pakistan is a major non-NATO ally of the US, but India is not. The big question then is dehyphenation possible as far as the current administration and the current dispensation is concerned, because we've seen, for instance, the Pakistan Army Chief come and repeatedly meet with President Trump. So there are a lot of people who are wondering what exactly is going on with Pakistan.
Again, we're trying to figure it out. Part of the reason we did the resolution, again, is to reassure from the congressional side, we don't see this equivalence between India and Pakistan. We see members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans, see the long-term strategic, security, economic interests all align with India. And we don't want that to change. That's been a strategy for 30 years, certainly the 14 years I've been in Congress. We want to continue that trajectory. I think it's important for members of Congress to speak out at this time. And this is a time for the Indian American diaspora to activate, to go talk to their members of Congress, have them sign this resolution, make this firm commitment to this 21st century partnership.
Right. Let me go on to another very important issue between India and the United States. And very clearly, it's not just the 50% tariffs, but also aspects like a $100,000 H1-B visa fee, which are issues which are straining ties. You've said as much yourself. But the big question is that, is this being driven, and all of these policy decisions being driven a lot by politics and not enough long-term strategic thinking? Because nearly 75% of those H1-B visas, as we all know, go to Indians, and the restrictions have shocked many in India. And you have said that the United States could potentially be hurt and by a decision like this. The big question is, are you going to risk losing a generation of Indian tech talent permanently with such decisions?
Well, you've seen members of Congress, Democrats, Republicans, speak out against this $100,000 fee. And you've seen President Trump actually walk some of this back. So I think he's getting bad advice. I think this was a poorly hatched policy that a handful of folks within the White House came up with, folks like Peter Navarro, who didn't think this through. Again, you're watching President Trump start to walk back some of this, saying, hey, wait a minute, we need this talent. We need these doctors, these technology workers. I think it also creates an opportunity for us to create maybe a separate category of visas where companies in the United States, companies in India that are tackling some of these big challenges and opportunities like AI can have their workers move back and forth in a more free manner. These are not folks that are at risk of overstaying their visas. These are folks that are working together to solve big academic challenges, big technology challenges. So I think it is an opportunity for us to think differently.
Let me also shift focus to, one thing that's really spoken about. Of course, you're a politician of Indian origin who's working there in the United States. You've been elected to office. We've recently seen, of course, the election of the New York mayor and the emergence of Zoran Mamdani. Now, he's, of course, a very controversial figure. We've seen, for instance, Eric Trump, attacking Zoran Mamdani as a socialist communist who wants to nationalize grocery stores, hates the Jewish people, hates Indian population, and has used his rise to argue that far-left policies are undermining major American cities. As one of the most prominent Indian-American lawmakers, how do you respond to this sort of rhetoric?
I think that's politics and political rhetoric. We've seen the attacks on the Indian-American diaspora. Certainly, I've been subject to some of those attacks myself. At the end of the day, I don't think that's the sentiment of most Americans. Now, I tend to be a moderate, fiscally conservative Democrat. Mr. Mamdani, or Mayor Mamdani, may have slightly different policies, but we'll see how that plays out in New York City. Again, I wish him the best of successes. This broad diaspora, you're seeing the rise of the next generation of Indian Americans running for office. There's now 6 of us in Congress. When I was first elected, I was the only one. So I think that is a good thing. I think you're seeing the diaspora that's had so much success in business and medicine and technology now enter the arena of politics. And I think that can only be positive for the U.S.-India relationship.
Right. I want to shift focus to another very, very controversial issue there in the United States. A lot of Indians also talking about it because after there's been a month-long saga, or several months-long saga, lawmakers in the U.S. House of Representatives and the Senate, with only one no vote on Tuesday, have approved a bill to compel the Justice Department to release a trove of files from investigations into convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, who, of course, died in jail. Now, the Senate and House have unanimously demanded the release of these files, and you've said, no more excuses, no more delays. What specifically are you expecting that these files will reveal that's been hidden so far? And how confident are you that the Justice Department will comply fully without redactions or any political interference?
I'm not confident that President Trump will release the full files or his Justice Department will release the files. But the American people have spoken pretty loudly that they'd like to put this episode behind them. The convicted sex offender, the victims, this is a way, hopefully, for the victims to find some closure. Again, I think for President Trump's interest, given everything that's going on in the world right now. Put this episode behind him. If there's nothing to see there, if he's innocent, let's put this behind him so we can get on to things like getting a trade deal with India.
Right. But Trump himself appears to have done a sudden U-turn in the Epstein case, with him now urging Republican House to vote for the release of these files. Why do you think that he shifted his stance from calling it a Democrat hoax to saying that there's nothing to hide, as you mentioned?
I mean, I think he understood the politics, that we had the votes to pass this out of the House, that the American public wants full transparency here, that they'd like to see what they're trying to hide in those files. And then, I don't think the president wanted to lose that vote, so he just shifted his perspective.
And, there's just about a month and a half to go, but I must ask you this. Are you hopeful that we'll be looking at the closure of a trade deal by the end of this year, Congressman Bera?
I mean, I sure hope so. It's been a very elusive thing. We've gotten close at times in the past. I think part of the signal here to President Trump and the administration is Congress is behind you. Let's get this trade deal done. Let's get down to zero tariffs or close to zero tariffs if we can. That would be good for both countries and both of our economies.
Congressman Bera, thank you so much for taking the time out and speaking to us here at Times Now, sir.
Thank you. Be well.